Excellent. Okay, welcome everybody. Here we are, very tail end as far as we could push it into June, and we're getting our final webinar in the COVID safe and accessible election campaign looked after, covering off our main points. We've got members here today from our Elections Access Advisory team. I'll be introducing them as the presentation proceeds, but they have been a key part of our organizing to date, and really looking forward to getting this particular webinar in the can today with them. So as you're aware, MNL and PMA have been working together now since February on a framework for the COVID safe and accessible elections. That campaign, of course, has really emphasized the opportunity to option vote by mail as a way to enhance the flexibility that you have come September. We're providing a bit of a coordinated countdown, a variety of resources and supports, some group purchasing support that we'll actually have an update for you on that we'll address in a moment, and of course advocacy. A lot of what we're doing right now is going to provide basis for taking a look at the Municipal Elections Act. Legislative review is something that we're expecting to see provincially in the wake of the provincial election experience, and we can be fairly confident that the municipal legislation will similarly see some attention. Municipal and provincial affairs, of course, are providing their own municipal elections materials. No matter which way you're going, if you're doing vote by mail or if you're sticking with the sort of default election practice, of course, they provide basic training regarding what you're doing as a poll staff member, what sort of considerations you have more generally under the Municipal Elections Act. If you're doing vote by mail, there are some things that you're, of course, doing differently pursuant to your own vote by mail regulations. However, you still will need to follow a lot of the resources that are mounted here on the Municipal Affairs election page. Our last webinar, of course, was with respect to our vote by mail guidance. We have the guide up on the site. The webinar video from that session is also available on demand. The vote by mail regulations, it's a very bare bones approach. We had a legal review. There are a whole series of templates in there for you to look at, and the guide, of course, talks you through some of the main questions that you have to address under vote by mail. With respect to some of the purchasing supports, I'm going to toss briefly to Brad right now, because the latest piece, for those of you that are doing vote by mail, is around our ballot kit and some of the materials that, of course, you wouldn't necessarily have to have purchased for a standard election, that it made sense for us to look at sourcing under a group purchasing model. So, Brad, can you say a few things about that?
Sounds good. Thanks, Kathleen. Really appreciate it. Hello, everybody. Good morning, or good afternoon, I should say. As always, MNL is here to help. So today, of course, we're launching a ordering form for ballot kits. It's what you see here in front of you. It'll be posted on our website and mailed out, and it will also be on our municipal election website. This will allow you to purchase key items for your vote by mail process, including the kits that are required for your ballots. That would include secrecy envelopes, colored return envelopes, mail out envelopes, sequentially numbered declaration forms, and of course, all the supplies that are available. So there's multiple options on how you can avail of our services in this regard. First of all, we ask you to fill out the form. There's some key information there that we need, including the population of your community and the estimated number of eligible voters. And then we can work with you to determine exactly how many secrecy envelopes you need, how many declaration forms, and so on. So once you reach out to us, there's one of three options. First option is that you can order directly through us, and we'll work with a printer here in St. John's who will get the materials out to you. The second option is we have preferred suppliers in all regions across the province, including Corner Brook, Fisher's Falls, Grand Falls, Windsor, Happy Valley, Goose Bay, Labrador City, and Stephenville. So if you want to have all this stuff printed at a local vendor where you can easily get it or get it delivered cheaper than if it was being shipped from St. John's, we've laid all the groundwork with these suppliers to make sure they know what you need and when you need it. And you submitting this form and working with us will facilitate that process to make sure you've got everything that you need. So I hope that's good, Kathleen.
Fabulous. Thanks, Brad. And a final reminder right now for those of you that are doing vote by mail, we're down to the crunch right now. Municipal and Provincial Affairs issued a final circular referring to their deadline now for folks to basically pass that final motion respecting your vote by mail regulations, which of course you'll recall is the third in a chain of council decisions. The first being, the decision to actually ask for vote by mail permission. The second being the one to actually provide the authority or to authorize your voters to use vote by mail to complete their voting this fall. And then the final piece was basically using the guide to put together your vote by mail regulations and putting together the package to submit, which you would do at the point that you've made this motion of council on the draft that you put together. And just a reminder, if you're using the guidance kit, there are basically three key parts. The first part being the main body of the regulations, the second part being what is referred to as Appendix A, or the procedures relating to vote by mail. And then you just need to add as appendices B and C your template for the ballots and your template for the declaration form, because those are two pieces that will differ from what the standing forms are that Municipal and Provincial Affairs has. And of course, the Act calls for serially numbered ballots. These under vote by mail, the ballots are not serially numbered in this particular kit. We're rolling with the declaration form instead as the serially numbered component. Okay. So here we are. Hard to believe we've been at it a few months now, but we are right up against now the MAPA deadline for a lot of the vote by mail related inputs. So those of you that are going that route, this really is crunch time. July the 5th. We understand there's a little bit of wiggle room, if say council is only meeting on Tuesday night, there's a little bit of give there if you're sort of racing to the finish line. But basically, the end of next week, it will be too late for people who might decide at that stage in the game they want to go the vote by mail route. There's going to be a period of time required by the department in order to review the regulations and ensure that you've got everything you need in place for the next key deadlines that you face at the end of July, when all of those things have to be made available to candidates and whatnot. So this sort of brings us now into the space where we can sort of set aside that top line in our timeline. We've of course addressed in a prior webinar the voters list with Elections NL and the Office of the Information Privacy Commissioner supports. And today we're really kicking off our accessibility support component. This campaign, accessibility is a very key part of the messaging that we've been pursuing, and of course accessibility, like the voters list, these are themes that apply whether you're doing vote by mail or a regular sort of default election under the Act. So we expect everybody to have things here that will be of use and interest to them. We've, of course, had a tremendous amount of support from a host of community advisors who you've been introduced to in our prior webinars. And today you're gonna meet a bunch of the remaining members of that team. Our access committee has met now for what, 3 months, I think, on and off, in order to get us to the place we're at right now. So really happy that we find ourselves here. And of course, you know, when I'm saying we've been doing this for months, we of course began this process back in February when things basically came apart at the seams for the provincial government election that happened at the time. So I'm actually going to ask Nancy Reed from the Coalition of Persons with Disabilities to sort of pick up that thread, because of course they were sitting with the rest of us, you know, at the point that the lockdown played itself out in, you know, the final days of the provincial election, and she immediately had to jump into action to speak to the particular concerns of the communities she represents.
Thanks, Kathleen. So great to be here today. Thank you all for giving me the opportunity. And I want to start out by just telling you a little bit of who I am and what I represent. As Kathleen said, I'm with the Coalition of Persons with Disabilities, Newfoundland and Labrador. And the coalition represents and works to consider systemic advocacy for persons from a cross-disability perspective throughout the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. So I hope to speak to some of the accessibility concerns today that will really consider things from a variety of different backgrounds, not just from a physical accessibility space. Kathleen, I'll ask you to just go to the next slide, please. And this is the starting place. I guess, as Kathleen mentioned, the reason that this has all become such I guess, an obvious topic for us to be speaking about today is something that we were hit with, I guess, with in February, with the opportunity or the lack of opportunity to vote in the provincial election in means other than by mail-in ballot only. From the perspective of persons with disabilities, the opportunity to use a special ballot, mail-in ballot, is sometimes an appropriate choice, but very often it is also a barrier for many people to be expected to vote only as a mail-in ballot. Sometimes puts up barriers for individuals, especially individuals with different types of disability, especially around people who are blind, people who do not have the capacity to read and write, to follow complex directions as the enveloping process and that type of thing. So there were a number of individuals that were immediately prevented from voting because the traditional balloting system that we had been used to was not available in February. And I will say that previous to this particular most recent provincial election, Elections NL had been able to provide some great accommodations, some really good work with the community to enable appropriate accommodations for people with a variety of disabilities, to enable access to the vote, to enable people to vote. So when this happened so quickly in February, it was one of those moments that was really eye-opening for many people, and I'm going to say the coalition included in that space.
So that was really the starting point then for our access committee. We recognized that there were all kinds of these sorts of barriers that would be present, you know, no matter what mode of voting you're engaged in, and that these are conversations that, you know, the returning officer, your deputy returning officer, your election staff in general, you know, need to be conscious of the likelihood that there are going to be voters presenting themselves both at the poll or, you know, otherwise in the community that that will need accommodations and other supports. And you know, getting ahead of the process of thinking these things through is really important. day of is probably a little late in the process. So, there are a variety of themes that we've been showing you to this point that speak to the types of considerations that this webinar would address in general. But that really, in terms of what we're going to be talking about today, kind of break down into 5 key areas and or dimensions, if you will, of access and inclusion, and moreover choice, because in many instances, what we're looking to do in this instance is to ensure that individuals who may be facing barriers are given the opportunities, the same opportunities for a choice in how they pursue their voting practice that able-bodied individuals have. So this is going to be what we talk our way through now for the remainder of our time here today. So you'll see those dimensions working from the physical right down through linguistic and literacy concerns. The option to vote by mail in relation to the access question was something that was a big part of this campaign because vote by mail is a mechanism that affords both more time. You go from having focus on a single election day to actually having a voting period. And in so doing, you're also creating an opportunity then for there to be accommodations and individual supports provided over a period of time. And the fact that you have a vote by mail kit means that that can go out and can be worked with by the individual themselves and that voter, if they've got others in their circle who can support them, they're able to complete and return their vote in much the same fashion everybody else can. However, as Nancy noted, there are still circumstances where vote by mail is not perfect either. So I'll toss back now to Nancy, and she's going to take us through considerations for physical access.
Thanks, Kathleen. So as Kathleen said, when we consider physical access, we're going to think about a bunch of different things. And, in the spaces that you all occupy in your municipalities, there are certainly spaces that your residents access from time to time. So everything that I'm going to talk about when we consider physical access and enabling access for persons during the voting process is something that you can typically translate or consider in all of your account activities. We think about the spaces that are going to be used for the voting process, whether that's a physical polling station, or if it's through the mail-in ballot, or if there's a drop-off location for ballots and that type of thing. We need to consider that any spaces that are used by the general public, by your residents, consider open spaces, doorways that are level entry, have appropriately constructed ramps that are available for the greatest number of people. When we think about doors themselves, it's important to think about the amount of tension on a door very often. Some of those things are variable, and some of the things that we don't automatically consider, but can really change without any cost, just to change the amount of tension on a door so that somebody who doesn't have the grip strength or the capacity to push on something can still open the door. I will say that there's always a concern that the amount of tension on a door is there to support fire regulations and emergency planning. However, that number is available to you through fire services, and very often doors are put in place that have higher amount of tension than is actually needed to support fire safety. So there is always opportunity to ensure that the amount of tension on a door is the appropriate amount. I've mentioned lever handles here, and simply just a handle that, if you have a handle that you have to manually open, if it's one that is a lever that you can touch with the back of your hand or your elbow or anything else, or a briefcase or a cup of coffee to open it, as opposed to having to grasp and turn, it's certainly more available to the greatest number of people. We have to consider paths of travel, the spaces that people will navigate to get to any of your environments. Very often, I use a wheelchair. You guys can't see me completely, but I use a manual wheelchair, and it's frequent that I will go to a space and there's a garbage can which is actually too far outside of the doorway, and it makes my entry into a space difficult, or it's blocking the counter and that type of thing. So all of the paths of travel, we just need to be really able to navigate those appropriately. I'm going to show you some pictures in a second to demonstrate some of what I'm saying here, but just going through the list a little. When we think about color contrast, when we are trying to navigate a space, very often persons who have low vision or different types of vision will certainly be able to see some color. And oftentimes, if the color of the floor and the color of the wall really are very similar, it's difficult for many people to navigate, to understand where the floor ends and where the wall begins. And so if we have a color contrasting strip at the base of the floor, at the base of the wall rather, just like where the baseboard would be, if that were done in a significantly contrasting color, very often it indicates a path of travel for persons who have low vision. It's really important in those public spaces where people are expecting to navigate a space. Again, counter heights, some of the things that we see, and in the picture that Kathleen is showing here, you can see the counter height on the bottom picture. It's not the best picture, but I hope you can see it there. There's a dual counter in that space. And so if somebody is of shorter stature or somebody's using a mobility aid or wheelchair, they could potentially use both, either the lower counter, or somebody who doesn't have the capacity to reach that could use the upper counter. You'll notice on that counter as well, there's what we call lap room. So there's a space where myself as a chair user, I can actually go right to that space. I'm not removed from it because I don't have a barrier preventing my legs to go underneath. So I can go right in there and speak to the individual at the counter. On that same slide, you'll see a couple of other pictures. In the center up above, you'll see the operators for the for the door openers, and you'll see a trash bin immediately in front of that. It prevents me from actually getting close enough to operate the switch. We just need to move those things over so that I can have that full access. The picture to the far left of the doorway, it looks great to most individuals, but if you think about me as a chair user, I could potentially get up that ramp, but I've got nowhere to park my chair and still open the door because I'm parked immediately in front of the door. So I can't pull the door on myself to open. I'm going backwards on the ramp. What I need to have there is a level platform to the left of that door so that I can open the door and then turn my chair to go inside. Again, those things are more easily accomplished when you have an automatic door, but the reality is many of our towns just don't have automatic doors. So when you don't, it's a consideration of let's make sure that somebody has a place to actually park to open the door and then navigate that space. One more picture I'll indicate on the top there at the far right. You'll see that double doorway and it looks like a great open space. The problem is what you can see there is everything is basically in the same color scheme. And so in the center of both of those doors, we have that post. It's called a mullion. And that mullion is actually a barrier. I went to this particular building with an individual, and the individual who was with me was kind of not really paying attention to the space. And he actually walked right into that steel post. An individual with slightly lower vision, but it's not easily visible. And so again, it's one of those things that ideally that would not be there. We'd have a different mechanism for holding the doors. But if you have something like that, if that were actually colored with a bright yellow or an orange strip or paint, or even a black against that light gray, it would be so much more visible for so many more people and avoiding the risk of some of those dangers. Again, that's not a significantly costly fix, but it's something we need to consider in those spaces. And folks, I know I'm going through a bunch of things quickly. There are a bunch of resources attached to this and available through MNL that can help guide you through some of these considerations. Just a couple of considerations around physical access here. You'll see the fire extinguisher. And as a wheelchair user, I have zero access to that fire extinguisher. The desk or the little drawer set in front of that is completely blocking my access from being able to reach that fire extinguisher. Again, in washrooms, you see, a classic washroom set here. The soap dispenser is likely too high for me to reach as a chair user, but in addition to that, the garbage receptacle again is placed immediately under it, so it's creating a further barrier to me to be able to access those spaces. The pedestal table that you see there, this is actually my chair, my elbow on the table that you're seeing there. Very often, pedestal tables are barriers for people using wheelchairs. I don't have a space to put my legs under that chair because that pedestal is in place. So in your practices, in your polling stations, when you have tables set up, again, it's really important whenever possible to have a table that has 4 legs and an open space that provides that access for chair users underneath. Mostly simple things. You usually have some kind of a choice between that in your towns, but it's a consideration and one that is really valuable for so many people. Go to the next slide, Kathleen. I mentioned that there are a number of resources attached to this presentation, and this is just one of the resources. This particular is a site that was created in partnership with the Coalition and provincial government a couple of years ago, and it's around universal design. And I think it's really important for everybody to understand that universal design, and it might sound complicated and overwhelming, I'd encourage you to go into this website because it really describes some of the simplicity of universal design. But it's about following principles of design or reconstruction and modification that really make things available to the greatest number of people. When I mentioned the lever handles, that's an example of universal design. It's one that if I'm a mom who is in the kitchen and I'm at my sink and I'm trying to turn on the tap because I've got a chicken that I'm trying to clean, I don't want to get the chicken stuff all over the tap. But if I've got a lever handle on the tap, I can just touch it with the back of my hand and the water comes on. It's about universal access. And so again, this resource is one that is really helpful for individuals. And in the voting process, in the ballot, in the spaces that you're creating for people, gives you opportunities to consider just the spaces that you are making available to people to ensure that your residents, the greatest number of residents, have best access to it. Next slide, Kathleen. This is another resource that's available. This one is a really nice one done by the Rick Hansen Foundation. And this particular link will bring you to a series of checklists to consider if your ramp is accessible, if your door is accessible, if you have an elevator, if it's appropriately designed, if it's accessible, and especially for reception and service areas. So thinking about counter heights, thinking about the entrances to those spaces. This is a really nice, easy to use, friendly checklist of things that will help you determine if the spaces that you believe are accessible or available are actually doing what you need them to do. And that's so important in this voting process. You're hopefully bringing residents in and inviting people who might not necessarily be contributing to the municipality and to the things that you do. And if you can demonstrate the opportunity to do that to everybody, it really increases the number of people that want to participate in civic engagement. This particular slide talks about the audit tool, and it's one that I did with the coalition. Well, it's been used for a couple of items before this. I changed it up slightly for our municipal election, and it's an audit tool. Again, it's in this piece, but it really considers a number of things. It looks at the signage of the spaces that you're going to be using for your municipal election, whatever that is. It looks at parking, at the entrance spaces, the ramps, that type of thing. There's a number of pieces in that. Not only is there a checklist with that, there's an accompanying guide. So the guide is several pages long, but for every activity listed in the audit, there is a series of questions that you can then ask yourself and answer, which will help you determine whether or not that particular activity is accessible, or if there are things that you can do, usually in-house, to try to change that or to consider doing something a little differently. I hope that it's a tool that you'll find to be useful. It's been used similarly in other spaces and for other places, and we've received some good feedback on it, so I'm hopeful that it will be used the same. This particular one is important for me as well. While there's opportunity to vote, if there is an opportunity to vote by mail-in only, and if that space in your particular municipality means that voters will be able to drop off their mail-in kits in a drop box, we need to really consider the accessibility of that drop box. And this is also something that's available in the guide, some considerations, but I like this photograph because it reminds me, sorry, Kathleen, can you just go back a second? Thanks.
Sorry.
No worries. It reminds me that if you see the first, the box here on the front, the darker colored one, that particular box would mean that you'd have to hold it open with one hand and then put the ballot in with the other hand. And of course, that is a barrier for some individuals. It requires fine motor dexterity and grip to be able to open the space. And then of course, the use of two hands simultaneously to do that. So that's potentially a barrier for folks. Also, you can see that in the environment of this one, and this one is in the snow. Hopefully in September we won't have snow, but you know, we never know. And of course, I've had the privilege of being in Labrador in the fall, and there might just be some snow. So let's consider that we need to be sure that any of the spaces that we've been in are clear of debris, and we can ensure access to it in many ways. Again, in the guide, there's a number of considerations for drop boxes and ballots and ensuring those spaces are available. That's kind of a thinking on the physical access of things. But when we think about accessibility, we really also need to consider awareness and education. So again, in the accompanying all of this, there's a couple of guides. One of them, and I just have a printout here, but it's Words with Dignity. Many of you may already have it in your offices and in your municipalities, but it's a guide that was created by provincial government, and here we have it, that really talks about respectful language and ways to communicate with people or around people with disabilities in a way that is considered appropriate today by most people. It uses person-first language, and again, it's a guide. We do a number of pieces of training at the Coalition, and this one we use in everything that we do. I tell people you can always have one. It's my cheat sheet, and I usually have one around me in my office space, so that if I want to be sure of the language I'm using, it's always available to me. Kathleen, could I get you to go back one slide for a second? Thanks. I just want to also consider the knowledge of appropriate and necessary accommodations. And with that, there's no set rule, I'm going to say that, but I would hope that in order to enable best opportunity through the selection process, that staff and any persons who are working with residents through the process would have opportunity to recognize that oftentimes or sometimes we need to provide accommodations for individuals that might be individual. If you have a person coming into your facility or into your space, or you're working with them or talking to them, very often we need to think about ways that we do things differently. And sometimes it just means we ask the person, how can I assist you? What can I do to help you in this process? Can I clarify something? And we need to do that with what we call plain language, simple, straightforward information and questions. Do it in a way that is using slow language. And I don't mean slow, but I mean not as quickly as I talk. And I'm sorry, folks, I know that I speak quickly. But really being aware of the opportunity to do things well and to communicate with people in a way that they need to communicate. In some of the physical spaces that you will use, if you have a polling station set up in a town hall or wherever it is, we need to make sure that staff or persons in that space have an understanding of the I guess the accessibility features, if you want to call it that, of that building. So if somebody's coming and needs to know if there's an accessible washroom, the person there should have that understanding of, is there an accessible washroom? Where is it located? How do I help a person find that place? How do I provide direction? What about emergency egress from the building? Do I have an understanding of how many people are in the building? Persons who may need assistance to exit. All of those questions are things that we really should have an understanding of. And some of those things are, again, covered in the guide that were provided in this. But it's important for us to really have that understanding, and for persons, for staff and for others in your towns to have the confidence and the comfort to be able to be fully available and inclusive to everybody who's coming in. Also, the question around service animals, and service animals is a consideration that it's still a bit of a gray area, I'll be very honest. Our provincial regulations have yet not been created to support the Service Animal Act, but at a basic level, service animals must be accommodated. And we don't have time to go into all the details in this conversation right now, but if you have any questions around service animals and duty to accommodate and that type of thing, please don't hesitate and reach out to us at the Coalition. Our contact information is available through Kathleen, and we can certainly support that. But you know, it's important again that your staff recognizes that legitimate service animals must be accommodated and must be able to be entered in your buildings. So one more really important piece, and this is around barrier-specific approaches. There is a really great resource that Kathleen and I kind of found out about in this space, and I really am so glad to be able to share it with you. It's called Video Relay Service. And I knew something about it previous to this opportunity, but very honestly, I knew too little. And I'm so glad to have this opportunity to learn more. Video Relay Service, VRS, is something that is free to all of our municipalities, to all of our businesses, and it's simply an opportunity for you when you provide your contact information to your residents or to whoever. If at the end of your contact you say VRS calls welcome, what you are then doing is inviting persons who use American Sign Language as their first language or sign language. You're enabling people who are deaf and use American Sign Language to call you on the phone. And when they call you, they're going to actually be calling you through a VRS, a Video Relay Service opportunity. It's a company that, again, it costs nothing to you as a municipality, as the person receiving the call. But the person who uses American Sign Language, the person who is deaf, can then call you, and you will be speaking to the interpreter on the phone, and that's it. You're having a straight conversation with an interpreter, and the interpreter is connecting to the person who is deaf through a video phone. So the person who is deaf is talking to the interpreter and through the interpreter to you, but you on the other end are only talking to the interpreter, and you speak, the interpreter answers. The only I guess hesitation and the only negativity about it, if you consider it that, is if you receive a phone call from this this opportunity from Video Relay Services, you will say, hello, this is a town of whatever, and the call will come in, and it will be a slight moment, and somebody will identify, it may even be an automated sound. Please hold, you're being connected to an individual through Video Relay Services. It's really important that, again, your staff, your persons, whoever is answering the phone, has the understanding that this is a legitimate call. It will take a little while, maybe 15, 20 seconds to connect to somebody. And it's important that the person answering the phone has the understanding that this is not a telemarketer, it's not a crank call. You just have to wait so that the person on the other end can connect. Because when you think about the system, you have an interpreter who is in one location anywhere in the world. You have an individual who is deaf and is using interpreting services. And so they're using a video phone to connect to each other, to communicate to each other. And then the interpreter then has to provide the information to you receiving the call. There's a little bit of a time delay, but it's so much worth the effort. And if you as a municipality are willing to receive VRS calls, it's such an opportunity for you to be inclusive of your community. And I can guarantee you that the response in terms of civic engagement and the response of people from the community will be enormous and well worth your effort. So I'll ask Kathleen to change the slide. Again, when we think about barrier-specific approaches, that's the key one. But we also think about other types of disability that sometimes need specific consideration. I mentioned earlier that the mail-in ballot only creates barriers for some individuals, and that's obvious. But and there are ways that in the traditional balloting method, there were accommodations for individuals who had certain barriers that can be accommodated in the traditional polling station. I will also point out another resource that's easily available to you, and it's through Elections NL. They have a number of videos there that really describe, and this is the piece of it here, that really describe accommodations that are available in traditional polling stations, things that I hope that many of our municipalities have capacity to do. Unfortunately, if we're in a mail-in ballot only, some of these accommodations are less available. I'm not sure how many of those accommodations would be available when we think about templates for persons who are blind. You know, if you consider that from a mail-in only space. But again, this particular site from Elections NL has some videos that really can give you direction of how to be considering of particular barriers, especially those around vision loss, around hearing loss, for persons who have intellectual disabilities and other disabilities where they would be unable to mark a ballot independently and require supports. So again, this is a great resource for those folks. This other one, again, is another resource included here. Clearing Our Path is a resource that's been created by CNIB, the National Institute for the Blind. And it really talks about how to ensure your spaces are available to individuals with vision loss or blindness. And some of the really key things around color contrast around the spaces and how we don't put barriers up that we don't, you know, that were unintentional. Again, a really great resource, and I'd encourage anybody to check into that for sure.
Fabulous. Okay, well, we're gonna toss now to Pamela Daw and the perspective from the Office of the Seniors Advocate for the province.
Thank you, Kathleen. So our office is an independent office of the House of Assembly, and what we look at are systemic issues impacting seniors. So we know that within your legislation, there are sections 48 and 49, which look at you know, the incapacitated voter, that's the language, and mobile and special polls, that sort of thing. What I want you to think about, and maybe you already have, is what the COVID has, the challenges, I guess, that we have due to COVID with regard to people living in care facilities. And when I refer to care facilities, I'm talking about long-term care facilities, personal care, and even acute care, which would be in hospital settings. Some things you have to consider. Well, first of all, seniors vote. Seniors want to vote. And you know that it is amongst the number of seniors as a group is probably higher than any other group. So what if you are not able to go inside a facility? And I want you to also think about, you know, the residents who don't have anybody to help and them vote. So, you know, again, pre-COVID, in long-term care facilities and other care facilities, staff were very helpful, you know, organizing sometimes outings to go vote on election day for people who could. And they may still do that. I'm not sure. Or again, people living in care facilities had family, friends who could help them, you know, again, if it's a mail-in, or go to the polls if they were in fact inside the facility. What we have to think about is in the past, and again, if these mechanisms are used in this upcoming election, it really was very dependent on assistance from the facility staff as well. So not only election staff that you would have in place, but also people who work there. And what we have, what we have to consider right now is that we know that prior to COVID, we have heard how staff were already stretched to the limit in a lot of facilities. COVID pushed it off the charts. People, because of the restrictions of visitors, which would be family and friends, into these facilities, because of those restrictions, people, staff, I suppose, now have extra duties. There's extra things to do. So their ability to assist with the voting process is certainly going to be challenging. Right now, as of this morning, and this could change anytime, it could go one way or the other. Right now, most care facilities, residents have 2 visitors per day per person. That's what they're allowed. But within each facility, particularly in the personal care facilities, which are privately operated, there is some degree of interpretation of this and some flexibility. So you may find from place to place to place, there's some differences. So what I want you to think about again is visitation and entry to facilities is limited. And the terminology used is essential workers. So our staff who work with you to voting, election staff, are they essential? Are they deemed essential workers? So that's something for you to think about. So what I would suggest is having some conversations right now with these care facilities, discussions with, how we're going to do this, how we're going to help people vote. It is their right. And if I were you, I would want them voting because of the fact that the numbers are there. And so this is very important, but there's going to be some logistics to be worked out. So again, think ahead and plan for other issues that could arise. Restrictions may tighten, restrictions may loosen. We know that most residents in care facilities right now have had their second vaccine. That's great, and workers as well. But election staff may not. So again, there is that safety issue. So I'll leave it there in the absence of time. And if there's any questions, we'll certainly help you out with that going forward.
Thanks so much, Pamela. And now I'm going to turn it over to the Association for New Canadians, Jim Murphy and Frank Goff.
Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to be with you. We'll just leave that slide there for a moment so you can read through it quickly. Of course, I'm joking. That's kind of well, unless you read Arabic, of course. And that's a little, just put it there for a little bit of in a sense, a shock value. Of course, we deal with newcomers, and often these are people whose first language is not English. And this is even the simplified, voting, mail-in vote procedure here in this diagram. Sometimes when it's in English and it's not your first language, this is the impression, this is what it looks like, this is what it now, it's even more complicated if, Kathleen, what if it's a whole wall of information, not a simplified one, but a more complicated one? Of course, that's even worse again. So we can just go on to the next slide, Kathleen, if you will. So what we're talking about, of course, are newcomers. Now, for the most part, we deal with newcomers who are not yet citizens. Somebody who is a citizen and able to vote has already been here for a minimum of 3 years. That's the requirement, 3 years on the ground before you can even apply for citizenship. It takes at least a year, maybe longer. So they've probably been around at least for 4 years. But still, there may be some language or literacy issues, and there may be people in your community who have those issues. So this just kind of begs the question, and some questions we have here. Are there other cultural communities, something you might want to be aware of in thinking about your voter population? Are there other cultural communities in your town? Are there newcomers who aren't familiar with the Canadian election process? What kinds of resources or supports would help? Resources being materials, supports being perhaps people or organizations. And as the Association for New Canadians, I guess we're just saying that we are one potential resource that could help you out in this area. There may be other ethno-cultural organizations in your community, no doubt, who could also help out as well with particular groups. We also have satellite offices across the province. There's St. John's is our main office. We also have
There are seven satellite offices now.
Yeah.
Across the province, all of whom are willing to help for sure.
Yeah, there's Grand Falls, there's Corner Brook, there's a couple in Labrador. So a potential resource if there are people in your community who, again, whose first language is not English. And although for most of our people who've been around for some time, we've already been through part of our curriculum, for example, for most of our clients at the association is Canadian culture. And that includes the voting process, includes participation in what some of you may know as student vote every time there's an election. And so they're basically familiar with it. But again, language or literacy issues might be something to consider for certain populations. What can we say, just from moving along quickly? The association could be, for example, an organization that we could provide information sessions. We've often done that for events that are happening in the community, information sessions on the voting process, either these days online or in person or whatever, in class, in a school setting or whatever the case. So that's a possibility. We could provide referral to other organizations. Maybe you're not sure what organizations or what other groups might exist in your community. We might have some idea and be able to tell you where to focus or where to look. Let's see. We offer, of course, awareness and sensitivity training, cultural sensitivity training. Not to give ourselves a plug, but if that was something that a municipality was interested in, we certainly could arrange that as well. Just to say in very brief that this might be the time now, this much in advance of the election, to perhaps just think about those communities that might exist in your particular community, those ethno-cultural communities, and just reach out and see if there are in fact needs that they might have that could be met.
And I guess to add to that, sometimes, the municipalities are more aware than we may sometimes be as well. For example, we know that Goose Bay has a fairly large population of temporary foreign workers who would not be eligible to vote. But once they are here, they can apply for permanent residency, and then that's a pathway to citizenship. So, it just kind of ties in with being more aware of what they are able to do, even as temporary foreign workers, and what the process will be for voting. Just even understanding those things can be a value added for them, and an incentive, of course, for them to want to become citizens as well and be able to contribute to the any kind of voting process, really. So.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So that's the rundown. We've covered off our 5 key areas that we'd like you to think about in terms of the access that you're going to provide your voting community to this fall in your municipal elections. Of course, I will draw your attention once again to the municipal elections section of the MNL website. We've been mounting all of the resources there as they become available. And if you visit now and scroll down on the timeline, you'll see all of the resources that we've referred to today. I think I've got one more that we're going to have to add in, but you'll find most of the links that you need for things like the audit guide and checklist that Nancy reviewed, a number of those other links and resources that we touched base on. And moreover, we will be anticipating calls from you. As I noted earlier, the Municipal Elections Access team are comprised of individuals from a variety of representative organizations that can help you troubleshoot particular access issues or barriers that you're anticipating. So before we jump into Q&A, I'll just draw your attention. We have the general email at MNL. If you flag in the subject line of a question the fact that you are looking for access support, that would help us parse your requests. And we have our 1-800 number as well as our general phone number. But again, if you have specific questions that relate to access, we will put you in touch with a member of our team in order to talk those scenarios through with someone. And that is it for the presentation itself. Do we have any questions already in the chat?
We don't have questions yet, but I'd certainly encourage everyone to type them in the chat or use the raise hand function, and we can certainly respond to them.
We can also take the advantage to, if there are any things any of the presenters would like to expand on at this stage in the game, that's another opportunity for us.
I'll just have a curiosity question. Can some of our participants, can you possibly just put in the chat your municipality or where you're located? I'm really curious to know. Oh, thank you, everybody, for doing that. Thank you.
Apologize, I'm having some difficulties with my screen right now. So if you're looking at the one slide, I'm just trying to get my controls back up. There. Clear that. Anybody in the audience perhaps have a particular access challenge that they encountered last election?
Nancy speaking. I'm just going to jump in if I could for Kathleen just for 1 second. And I think I said this in the presentation, but I just want to, I guess, speak to municipalities present and just remind you again that, the importance of these conversations is absolutely timely in terms of the election. But the information that our groups have brought forward today is just so transferable to to the everyday spaces that you occupy. And I think about it with newcomers and with seniors and with persons with disabilities, that we're real citizens and residents in your towns every day. And by ensuring that our municipalities are able to really reach out to ensure all of our residents are included, that will come back to you in enormous ways. I can guarantee it. So I just want to thank you all for being here today, because I think that means a lot to us, from our perspectives as well.
I can jump in there as well. Thank you, Nancy. And I mean, the great part about this series and the work that everyone is doing here, and we certainly appreciate it, is that this doesn't stop at September 28th. We're going to be posting this webinar, and to your point, like the learnings, the pieces from this extend well beyond the election and into many other spaces. And so we're so happy to have these conversations, to facilitate them and to share them out from now on. I mean, not that these conversations weren't happening beforehand, but I think we have so much important and additional work to do on this. So we really appreciate it.
Fabulous. The ANC's just noted in the chat that they currently have offices in Lab City, Goose Bay, Forto, St. Anthony, Grand Falls, Windsor, Clarenville, and St. John's. So that gives you an idea of some of the regional coverage that you have to reach out to particularly with respect to some of the supports that the ANC can offer. And we will be continuing to work with the Access Advisory Team through the summer. Our aim is to be able to provide a number of templates in translation for some of the key municipal election forms. We were thinking right off the bat that it would be nice to have some translated versions of that standard set of voting directions, for instance, that you're supposed to post inside the voting screen. So those are some of the things that you can expect to see us poking away at. And certainly, as your questions come in, we'll attempt to get solid answers and perhaps post those to the website in frequently asked questions feature, which we'll have a little more time to perhaps do some work on now that the big push on all of the basic webinars and vote by mail upfront administration is out of the way. So I'm not seeing any further questions, but very grateful for all of you for taking the time today and starting to apply an accessibility lens to your thinking about how you're going to prepare for the municipal elections this fall. And of course, more to come. We will look forward to hearing from you with further questions, and as promised, put you in touch with the people that are in the best position to answer them. And with that, I'll thank all of our fabulous presenters and our larger Access team membership. Of course, not all of them were present today, but you will see the benefit of their work one way or the other. And we've been very, very grateful for this particular partnership. Fabulous organizations. Thank you to the ANC. Thank you to Coalition of Persons with Disabilities. Thank you to the Office of the Seniors Advocate for the province. We have very much benefited from this relationship. Also, a thank you to Stella's Circle, whose representative wasn't able to be with us today. You will see more information coming from spaces that Stella's represents, which really cover off other vulnerable members of the community, marginal persons or persons with marginal conditions that may mean that they are not getting information about voting and may need your assistance as well. And I guess with that, there are no final comments, thoughts. We're good to go. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful summer.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye,
you.
thanks so much.
Bye-bye.